Yeah, this is a really hot topic, and it's something we almost talk about every single community of practice session. Dan.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
Extremely complex issue, and I'm really just sort of opening that up. I don't have the answer.
Can I add to that? Actually, I might just quickly.
Okay.
You've selected a very complex topic to look into for your doctoral study. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, if I ever finish it.
Yeah. Well, it was
today it's myself, Dan, and we joined with Brendan, Tim, and James. And we're very happy to kind of have a chat today about some of these areas that are kind of we see in with this kind of explosion of AI in this area. Now, just before we start, we're all aware that we've got to acknowledge the indigenous owners of the lands we're all in, and wherever you are listening to this video today, it's very important, probably more so than any other acknowledgement of country when we're thinking about inclusion and equity, that we're bringing everybody along this journey with us. And that's why all of us and lots of teachers out there are thinking about equity and inclusion as a big focus when we're looking at AI, because it's been implemented very sporadically across various different countries. And we're very lucky as well to have two folks on the call here from here in New Zealand who are going to kind of a welcome to you both, and myself and James. We're in Sydney and New South Wales, so welcome to all the Indigenous folks listening from the New South Wales area and Australia as well. But I think we've all got different angles of this. Everybody in our region is coming from different places, and we just want everybody to get the opportunities with AI and make sure that everybody gets the affordances with that. But obviously with equity and inclusion, it's not a new subject. We've been in this area before, whether it's through digital technologies of all flavors. So it's really, really interesting to kind of have this debate today about trying to support all of our learners. And there's obviously this real big kind of push to say, hey, this is the first time the barriers have been brought down. Everybody has access to their own tutors. But at the same time, the way this technology is being implemented, like other technologies, creates gaps along the way. So we want to make sure that AI is, I suppose, lifting all the boats. The water levels going up and lifting all the boats, rather than kind of leaving people behind, which unfortunately, because the implementations is actually doing at the minute in many areas of the world. So maybe we'll go around the grounds today and say hi to everybody. So maybe James, if you could start, let everybody know where you are and actually what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently working at UNSW College as an education specialist in AI, and my job really involves supporting educators to engage critically, creatively, ethically with AI, specifically for teaching and learning. My background's in creative writing. I did a PhD at UNSW back in 2019 in that. I was also first in family to graduate, and the issue of equity is really close to my heart because I was from a low SES background growing up, and so have a lot to say about that. But yeah, I've been working in this space for the last, I guess, 3 years or so, AI in education, but had worked in higher ed previously for like the last 10 years. So yeah, really exciting. Excited to be here. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks, James. Tim, how about yourself?
Ko Tim Gander toko wingwa, no ingarangi ho ke tūranga nui a kiwa toko kāinga. First of all, just want to acknowledge Simon and all her amazing work in the community of practice and bringing us all together. I know that anybody who's been watching this video, it'll be due to Simon's work, and behind Simon, all the amazing people that have dedicated their time to supporting this, like yourself, Dan, James, and B. Yeah, as I mentioned, my name's Tim Gander, and I grew up in the UK, but I'm based in New Zealand in a place called Turanganui-a-Kiwa, Tairāwhiti, Gisborne on the East Coast and the North Island. And I'm currently Executive Director at Education Partnership and Innovation Trust, which is an organisation which which aims to support every learner in Aotearoa to thrive. And one of those ways is, of course, enabling equity within education. And I'm of the belief that AI can be enabler of equity, and therefore my interest in AI has been quite deep since its inception within the education space. In early 2022, I worked with B, who you'll see on the screen next to me, and B was one of my master's students at Academy EX, and we started the New Zealand AI community of practice. And that's
Yay.
grown and grown and grown. And B and I, as being co-founders, were the two people that came together every week almost and talked about, what's happening in AI? Is it a bubble? Are we just existing in this space? And is it something that we're only talking about? Is it happening elsewhere? And we found that it is happening elsewhere within New Zealand, and it's grown the community itself to about 500 people. And we continue to meet every 2 weeks
Wow.
and talk about practice-based examples of how AI can enable effective pedagogy, inclusive learning, and equitable outcomes. And that's what the community is built on. So, yeah, really interested to be part of this conversation today. There's a few other pieces of research that I'm working on at the moment, and one of those is around how might we use AI to enable equitable access to assessment. One of the key areas in AI, as we'll all know, that's been perhaps a barrier, but also an opportunity, is the assessment discussion, and that's always been something that's either blocked how we're going to use AI or perhaps supported it in a way. So yeah, glad to be here today. I will also say, Dan, I do listen to your podcast a lot, and
Oh, wow.
I usually listen to it when I'm on a run and I'm training for a marathon at the moment. So whenever I'm hearing your voice, I'm feeling like I'm running. So it's good to
Okay,
be here.
well, I'll definitely give you a shout out when we do the next one. Thank you for listening to that. There's only
Yeah.
3 people in the world, and one's my mum. So thanks, Tim.
Well, that's 4 now. That's 4 now. But yeah, over to you,
Good.
B. E hoa.
Right, kia ora mai koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa, he mihi nui kia koutou katoa e whakarongo mai ana. Yeah, my name is B, Brendan Shaw. And yeah, I, along with Tim, started up the New Zealand AI Education Community of Practice. And we've been working at it 3 years now. Just over the last 2 years, we've done 25 PLDs. And it's been really great to see, like Tim said, like we didn't know if we were in a bubble or not. And to have access to, I've had people from Google and Microsoft, and we've had people. But apart from that, one of the things I'm really proud of is that we've got voices from inside the classroom, people who have their feet on the ground and can give like real lived experiences of what's working and what's not. I'm really proud that we are not. We have the freedom to say what we like and what we don't like about products and all the new things that come along. And I personally have had to temper my excitement a lot, because I tend to be like quite tech positive. This new thing's come out, it's so cool, it's going to be awesome. And the more I've looked into it, because I'm a PhD student as well, doing my PhD in effective implementation usage of AI barriers and concerns in Aotearoa New Zealand based schools. And yeah, I see more and more of the things that are, dangerous, but, that are of concern when it comes to AI as well. So I'm an educator. I teach primary and tertiary, primarily around Te Reo Māori, the Māori language. And yeah, students, and Tim is, I've been with Tim now for 3 years now, and yeah, just going strong on this. And I get to do lots of cool things like this, like meet you, Dan, and James, and yeah, he mihi nui kia Simon as well, for bringing us together.
That's so good. It's humbling to be on a call with you all. It's just fantastic, and I think from my perspective, I work for Microsoft. I was a teacher and a school improvement advisor and Ofsted inspector in the UK, and then I moved to Australia and been working for the university and Microsoft. And I suppose I'm supporting schools day in day out with this technology as well, and it's just really interesting to see with the different implementations and the way technology is used in multiple areas. But I haven't seen I've been involved in technology for all my life, really, in education context, and I've never seen such a big impetus and a change that's come in. A technology that's done such widespread kind of adoption as quickly before. And I started a little podcast you mentioned earlier on, Tim, about 6 years ago, before Gen AI was trendy, and yeah, it's like it's just really cracking on. But there's a lot of interesting things, and I think everybody on the call, you've done the further studies and studying further, like myself and yourself, B, and it's just opening lots of questions as well around the thought process, where we offload kind of thinking to AI, and how old do kids start using AI. It's really, really interesting. So let's start to explore some of these topics then. So B, you talked earlier on there about some of the things that you've been doing around the Maori language and kind of Indigenous students and things like that. What are you seeing as those barriers? What are those, and some of those classic barriers that we've seen before, kind of blending and merging into AI? Is it the same kind of thing?
Yeah. So in one of the sections of my literature review, I talk about the benefits and benefits, barriers, and concerns around AI in education. And one of the benefits is AI as the great equalizer. And then one of the big concerns is AI is something that will just exacerbate the chasm, as something that will bring along inequality. And there seems to be just as much reading on either side of that. I think if you look at for me, the most classic concern is it's just going to be an exacerbation of the digital divide that already exists. So AI is amazing in that it's very cheap to /free. Most people don't pay for AI. AI can run on your phone, and so to that extent, it's an amazing resource. But you still need internet, you still need computer, you still need a phone. You need a phone that has data and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. And just like we had with COVID, where we had, okay, we're all going online, and it's like, oh, turns out half our kids don't even have Wi-Fi at their house. So what are we going to do about that? Yeah. That doesn't sound very equal to me. I think that's probably the lead concern, and especially when we get to, say, for example, a great product that me and Tim used, a site. It's called Napkin AI. We used it religiously for like a year, and Tim's just broken my heart telling me that it's come out of beta and now it's paid.
Yeah.
And so
right.
with more and more of these things becoming paid, are we going to have like a 2-tier AI setup where we have like the free stuff and it's kind of okay, but then the real stuff, the real good stuff, is paid? And if that's the case, then what are we looking at? We're going to be looking at another divide.
Yeah.
May I add on to that, B, around, of course, you've got the physical devices and the software as well, but there's also the divide, which is growing wider and wider around the skills that people may have to be able to use and implement these tools in ways that support learning thoughtfully, ethically, and effectively. So it's growing, like you said, exponentially, Dan, and you'll see with the work that you do with schools and educators, that gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And what position do we have, and how do we play it so that people are involved in the conversations of upskilling teachers, not only through professional learning and development, but also through initial teacher education and training into the workforce? And how can that be acknowledged in such a tight and busy curriculum in the IT space? So that gap with skills is a huge one that could be bridged. And I know within New Zealand, we've got one really quite prominent framework, which is called the SAIL framework. It's called the Scaffolded AI Literacy Framework, which some of our colleagues have created, and that's seen as a way to bridge those gaps from understanding AI to all the way up to creating it, and it's a tiered approach. So there are things that exist, but how do we make them more widespread, and how do we support them to enable that equitable approach in skills and devices and software?
Yeah, it's really important, really interesting, isn't it? The skills angle as well, because yes, that's vital. And then James, with your element in terms of stepping between schools and that transitional area, what were you seeing in terms of the barriers to the implementation of AI?
Yeah, so back to B's point. So I was one of those kids without the internet. I was from a low SES background in high school growing up, and all my friends had internet. They had tutors, they had resources available. And it was interesting because in some ways not having the internet sort of forced me to go to the library and get books and do a lot of the hard work myself, which cause a bit of friction in the learning process, but may have actually ended up benefiting me. But I see this sort of benefits of, and it is a paradox. Like I just think back to myself going through the HSC and studying at home, and the lack of resources that I had there. And I had great support from, friends and family and stuff. But at the end of the day, it was not easy not having the internet, to do my assignments when a lot of my assignments required internet access. So I often relied on the old Britannica encyclopedia. Like I had a hard copy that sat at our bookshelves, and I think I had a CD-ROM which had all the Shakespeare essays and plays, and it just became like a go-to resource for me. So I had to sort of make do with things. But as a result of that, like it really forced me to learn. But I wonder if and I don't really know the answer. This is why it is a bit of a paradox. Like if the old me, James, studying for the HSC at home, if he had ChatGPT, right, and he was able to ask questions when he got stuck, or clarification on the maths problem that he was struggling with, and didn't have access to his teachers because it was holidays or whatever. I wonder if that would have made that process easier. I don't know the answer to that question. I'd like to think it would, but really, I think it's a bit of a question mark. It is a question as to whether it's going to widen that gap or close it. But I guess, and it is important to sort of mention, like in many ways, this is in some ways an equitable technology, because the access to it, like you only need to sort of I say only, but have a phone to be able to use ChatGPT, and sometimes without internet access, it can work. We have like offline LLMs available as well. But like B mentioned, that sort of you notice a lot of these companies, right? They're at the moment, AI is a bit of a money suck, and they're spending billions of dollars on this tech and trying to sort of make ends meet. And I've noticed that education has become the sort of forefront of where they think they can make their money. And we've seen it with Google, we've seen it with the napkin AI, the one that you mentioned, that used to be free. And I do wonder if one day Notebook LM is going to just say, look, we're going to charge you $100 a year to use our tool. Now that you love it and you've been using it for so long, we've made it free, we're going to now charge you. So I do wonder if that will then, once ChatGPT starts being free, it's going to be a bit of a problem for equity, I think.
And I think just on a technical point of view as well, while we've picked up, because it's a really interesting thread, and we don't want to get too kind of down in the weeds with it, but there's also another element which has happened with all of this, is that a lot of teachers are getting confused between consumer AI, which is what you're talking about here, and we've been in this position before, and we were like iPads and stuff, let's use this iPad app for this and that and the other. And, even ChatGPT itself, it's not secure. Teachers shouldn't be using it, right? And I'm trying not to put my Microsoft hat in. I'm not on this call as a Microsoft employee, but, if fraud happens in a ignore the school element to this, if from an equity point of view in a business, to get everybody using technologies, you don't want people using like a random consumer tool to put the financial stuff in, and the school's got sensitive data on child protection, and people are using ChatGPT, napkin.ai, God knows where they're saving all of this stuff and processing it, and not that teachers really care about that, but actually what we've seen is the Office for the Victorian Information Commissioner pick up where people have used ChatGPT for work in terms of like child protection issues and getting pinged on that. So there's an element where, like, a teacher will see a tool which is amazing and go, oh my, they're like, for example, Google LM, and they'll go, wow, that's amazing, because that's going to really make this content accessible for my autistic student that I'm teaching, and that's going to help them really, they love listening to music, they listen to podcasts, let's put my lesson in there, it's like, it's the perfect thing. But then you get all of these unintended consequences of not having structure, because and we'll talk about policy a bit later, but people are in the Wild West and using all of these consumer apps, which I suppose I'd argue that they shouldn't be using, or because you do end up in that position, don't you, where and Google and multiple players, currently Canva is, and I'm not knocking other companies or anything. Canva's free for all educators, right? They'll IPO in a year's time, and they'll be like, well, I wonder when, there's this almost rule, isn't there, where people get sticky on stuff, even in consumer land, definitely, where Google started it, where you put as many photos on your phone as you want, you got unlimited like space, and then suddenly you got to pay. Apple did the same, and you're like, oh, here we go. And now everybody's got to subscribe to the Apple extended storage stuff, and the Google Photos extended storage stuff, and the Microsoft OneDrive stuff. It's like it's a hard position to be in, I suppose. But the really interesting bit as well you mentioned there was about that tutoring element, and I think, Tim, you've got a really interesting angle on that support and scaffolding thing. And I suppose what opened my eyes to this was an episode that I spoke to Dr. Simon Breakspeare a couple of weeks ago for my little podcasting. And there's a big push to get young kids using AI, and it's like, Google's just pushed Gemini out for all kids. And then he was kind of talking to a conference, and he said, let's put the brakes on a little bit, and then that on one hand it was worrying me because the equity thing going, like now teachers are going to deal with saying stop to people, where parents are saying, are you being responsible by not skilling kids? That kind of element. And then the other element of, should we be offloading cognition and pedagogy and thinking to AI, and how old are they going to be? So, Tim, I know you've got some thoughts on that, the support and scaffolding area. Do you want to start to give us a bit of an insight into that with regards to equity?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. And good link back to that episode. I really loved listening to that episode, and I think that was a wonderful interview. It's really, really eye-opening or ear-opening, or at least it pricked my ears up anyway. But I think, we've got to go back to understand equity in education, and it's acknowledging that every learner starts at a different point and they're not equal when we come in. So we're talking about something which is different from giving everyone the same tools. It's supporting certain students in certain ways which can enable them to either feel successful themselves or meet the standards that we have created for them to meet. And when we've got AI as a tool at our fingertips, like Bea was mentioning, what tools can we leverage to support those individuals in meeting success? So if we are enabling students who have diverse needs to use these tools to either accelerate or staircase into certain elements of learning to meet that standard, like you mentioned earlier on, James, reflecting back as a young person, did that disadvantage you? Have you missed out on certain skills that can or have been bypassed? There's a few questions that come to my mind when I was thinking about this yesterday. I was walking back home from the bus, and it was the Breakspeare episode that sort of inspired this thought. And it's around who decides who will use these tools? Who has the power or who is empowered to say, okay, well, this child needs this to support them in learning. Do I have enough skill as an educator to understand when they use that tool and when they don't use that tool, and how much perhaps scaffolding or support they need from that? And that's the big gap in this conversation, is that empowerment of either educators or students or family, which I think is the big piece that's missed out of this. As a parent myself, as three very neurodivergent children, I've been supporting them to leverage AI tools to help them at school with things that the school is asking them to do. But I know, as one of my sons has dyscalculia, there's certain elements of maths that he's never going to get ever. And by using an AI tool, it can support him in feeling successful and meeting the standards that school says he has to meet. However, he doesn't go into school feeling like he's completely failing at something and there's no way that he can do it, which maybe then think about this whole paradigm shift around what we understand as education and what we understand as a certain standards that we have to meet within the system. Is AI going to completely disrupt that? And we need to think on that bigger scale. I think equity is a big issue that we need to challenge, and if we're thinking of it in a big melting pot of changing the paradigm of education, we need to understand who's making these decisions, what they're being informed by, and who has the voice at the table. Because at the moment, I don't think the learners who are facing the inequities in education have had much of a voice at all about how these tools are going to be used, and perhaps the implications. So, yeah, extremely complex issue, and I'm really just sort of opening that up. I don't have the answer.
Can I add to that, actually? I might
James,
just quickly say that, because it's, going from, like, looking at my trajectory from the HSC, where I was sort of under-resourced and didn't have access to things that I needed to support my learning, to then really pushing hard to get into university and be the sort of first in family to sort of break that barrier. I did sort of notice that the university was incredible. Like, I went to University of Newcastle at the time, and they provided all these resources, support, internet access, and that actually was incredible. It ended up, I ended up getting like a university medal. I really worked really hard, but I had the resources there to support that. And I think, back to your point about, like, to me, it sounds like AI and equity, really the issue isn't access, it's the literacy. Like, we need to, as universities, as education institutions, be providing students with these tools as one point of call, but also providing them with the ability to use those tools well. Otherwise, we're just, potentially going to harm their learning. If a big part of using AI isn't just logging in and asking it questions, it's like knowing that it may hallucinate, or it's embedded with bias, or it harms the environment, or what is its training. These are sort of questions that we need to teach students to ask, so that they can actually get the most out of all these different tools that are popping up.
So B, that's a really good point. So B, from your point of view, you're actually, in schools, day in, day out, helping people with this. What are you seeing then when you're thinking about, these points that Tim and James have made here about bringing this through?
So something that is related to the divide, but also related to equity and support and literacy, I think, especially when it comes to Indigenous. So there's, in my like in the literature, there's some fuzzy research that's saying that Indigenous and marginalised communities have less trust when it comes to AI. So they don't trust it as much. They're not as willing to adopt those technologies because of concerns around privacy, concerns around that, their image is going to get taken and used against them, or their financial or health records is going to be used somehow, some way against them. And so that points to not just literacy, but it points to trust and communication from whatever leadership looks like in that context. So I mean, if me and Tim started an AI company tomorrow, I would consider us as equals, and I wouldn't feel any type of need to shame or secrecy or doubt around that. If I had a question, I'd ask Tim, who I feel as a peer and as a colleague. But when you get into any type of hierarchical situation, that changes, and you end up with teachers. So you're asking what I see. I see teachers who are scared to tell their bosses they're using AI, and I see bosses who are keeping it secret from their people that they are using AI. And so there's a lack of communication, there's a lack of trust, but there's also just a lack of this kind of like, why is this even necessary? Why do we even have to have this kind of like super layered hierarchy when it comes to things like, am I allowed to use ChatGPT? Am I allowed to use, and that comes down to creating good frameworks, good frameworks and policy, which we'll talk about later on.
I suppose the other thing around that, when you think about the Indigenous side, I know in Australia there's a very, when programs come on where they're talking about death or things like that, there's a very cultural awareness around that, like you're not allowed imagery and things, and there's actually like a cultural sensitivity behind this as well. Like when you're thinking about it from an Indigenous point of view, and also the biases that some of these models have to different cultures, and it's just it needs, the models are trained on the internet, and the internet's full of rubbish as well as really important stuff, and it needs that sensitivity, I suppose. So it's a really good point from an Indigenous point, and it's really hard. Everything seems to come back to this paradox, doesn't it? Because I remember when I was in charge of Minecraft, we put the Maori language into Minecraft, and it was part of a cultural heritage thing. So we've like tried to preserve that language in there, but then at the same time you've got to do it with cultural sensitivity, and it's very important, and there's no answer to this, is there?
For me, it's about weighing up the benefit to the learner, to the end user at the end of the day. And it goes back to your original point, Dan, around, okay, well, am I allowed to use Nepkin? Am I allowed to use ChatGPT? From my perspective, if there's a tool that's going to support a learner in becoming successful in their own eyes, then you should use it hands down. Don't even ask permission. Just use it and go for it, and then worry about that later on. And if you can look at it through that sort of lens and apply perhaps universal design for learning, saying if it's going to work for this learner, then perhaps it will work for all learners. And that was the challenge that I saw when I was working in my tertiary role. I knew that some students in my class were using AI, mainly people like B, who to help with assessments, to help with literature reviews, and help with scaffolding their assessments. And I thought, this is good, they're using it, but it's also unfair because there's other students in the class that aren't able to use it because we haven't shown them or even given them permission. So it comes down to that role modeling, designing it for all learners with particular learners in mind, and then giving that permission for them to use those tools to accelerate, support, or backfill the learning that they've not had the access to in the past.
Yeah, it's very, very true. Yeah. So when we're looking at, we could talk about this forever, couldn't we? The transitional pedagogy that you were going to bring into this debate as well, James. So when you and correct me if I'm wrong here. So we're thinking about now, well, kids leaving school or perhaps going into tertiary education may not have been as successful in school, and then they're landing in to do further studies, and they're really excited, they're focusing on a subject, they're hitting this, and then they're thinking, well, how can I now transition and learn about learning again, and what tools can I use? Like how is this affecting the kind of equity piece?
Yeah, so I think it's Sally Kift who came up with the term transition pedagogy, but it's really just this idea that there is a sort of a hidden curriculum that exists when students start university. And if you go back to your studies, you'll probably remember this, but for some it's like particularly more difficult to sort of come into this space where the language that is used, the way that assessments are written up, the idea of like academic skills that may not have been learned or taught. So it can actually have more barriers for those that aren't familiar with these sorts of things compared to those that are from like the top schools in Australia that have been sort of embedding it into the curriculum. In fact, just recently I was looking at the top schools in Australia, and the report was released, and just seeing like all the list of schools, like every single one bar one was in a non-low SES suburb. So it just shows you how much of this can be ingrained into a system that can just continually be perpetuated. And that's why I'm a big fan of the University of Accord, and just seeing how that's going to sort of hopefully put a dent into that, and really see like low SES students like myself kind of coming through the system. But I worked at Academic Skills, like equivalent of like a learning center, for a long time, and I saw a lot of students coming in really confused about just simple academic skills, things that most students might already be familiar with or have been taught, and all it took was like a short conversation of, actually, here's how you want to write a thesis statement, or here's how you want to reference this sentence, and that's all it took, and then they're on their way. And I really see AI supporting that. I see AI coming in and helping students along the way to sort of transition into university and learn those skills as an enabler, as an enabling technology. I've seen it with NotebookLM, students putting in their lecture slides and course material, and just learning from that, asking questions about dense academic articles that they've just trying to come to terms with, not as like replacing reading, but as an extracurricular sort of step. And if you I was in a classroom the other day just talking to students, the students are like, a good portion of these students aren't using it to cheat. They're using these tools to extend their learning and really create resources for themselves to improve their understanding of their subject material. Because for the most part, most students want to actually be at uni and learn, believe it or not. So they're not all using it to just go and get, write my essay for me. It's a lot more nuanced than that when you actually talk to the students.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good point. Really, really. And Tim, from an academic point of view, and you supervising folks, and B, you're also supervising people as well, doing their studies. How's that affecting? You see the similar thread when people are coming in?
I, I think, well, the tools that we've got available and how people are using it at the moment they're using the tools to support them in jumping through the hoops that have been created already in the education
Right.
system.
That's a good point.
We need to be thinking beyond that. We need to be thinking, how can we use these tools to help us redefine what education looks like, to help us redefine what the next steps are in learning, so that we're getting the most out of individuals and the powers that they have. Everyone comes with different advantages and disadvantages. So instead of doing a gap assessment on, okay, where are we lacking those skills and how can we make you the same as everybody else, what about a strengths assessment with these tools and enable people to say, these are my real strengths, and if I use this tool on top of that, I'm going to be superhuman. I'm going to have these amazing attributes and skills. So in some organizations there is that flexibility in the way that learning and assessment can be either provided or gathered, but within environments where that doesn't exist, it's not so powerful. So in the environment that B and I worked in, we were with an organisation called Academy EX in New Zealand, and we had really, really flexible assessment processes. We had really flexible learning processes, which supported us in making the most of those skills which individuals had. And I think within the standardised education system, that's where that barrier is that we're being forced into using these tools into levelling the playing field, but I'd like us to refocus that and say, how can we not make everybody the same, but how can we just amplify these beautiful and amazing strengths that people have from different backgrounds? So yeah, I didn't completely answer your question, Dan, but it's a thought that went on from the end of James's experience that you shared there.
Yeah, when I think about the work that I look at from the tertiary students that I'm with, you see, so for example, I can see them using AI to get references, but then so the reference is good, but they've used it in the wrong place. The core reference is actually still poor, and so that alludes to something James was talking about. Is there's still this fundamental stuff and fundamental differences between students, and as Tim's saying, like it's not like we want to make everyone the same. We don't, but there still needs to be some kind of like, well, do you know when to use a reference? Okay. Now maybe you can use AI to help you, or you could get AI to help you learn how to use a reference. But something that just that come into mind when Tim was talking about that, about strengths, something that gets lost, and I've been thinking about this more and more recently with AI, is we're kind of focusing on using, just like Tim said, using AI to do these tick box things that other people have prescribed on top of us from decades, maybe in 100, 200-year-old education system. What's getting lost is the creativity. And I think AI is one of the most powerful technologies to ever come along that can help with creativity. And kids are creative, young adults are creative. Adults are creative. 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, 100-year-olds are creative. And AI has the chance to let the people who always wanted to be artists, and people who could write songs but can't sing, do that. And where's the education in that? It's hugely educational. For Māori, we value singing a lot. We value dance a lot, and it's kind of underrepresented in our education system because it's reading, writing, maths, not reading, writing, maths, and dance. But maybe it should be. Maybe it should be.
That's a really good point.
And things like that. Now, how can AI, which I think is, music, the Suno and Udio and those, like they're just blowing people away. Like VO2's just released, for movie makers, for filmmakers, and it's going to be a huge thing.
It's such a challenge, isn't it? Because I was listening to the Sora 2 stuff that got released yesterday by OpenAI, which is the new video and audio editing thing, and Sam Altman did say in the track of it is like AI, is also about creativity. It's not about productivity all the time. There's a big twist at the minute around, you'll save teachers time and things. There's that creative element. And yeah, I think you're spot on. I always struggle with this because I'm a muso myself, and I kind of like, and musicians, when you look back at like David Bowie always had really good points on this because he was like always thinking ahead and thinking of the internet and thinking new genres. That U2 always seem to do that as well. They kind of reinvent themselves and think about new ways to bring things on. We've had multiple instruments, you know, since the violin and all of that kind of stuff that move through the landscape, and we've seemed to have survived with synthesizers and electronic music and things like that. So I think, yeah, there's a worry with the creativity side of it. But when you look at music and things, it kind of brings it. I'm going to bring us on with something boring now, policy. And I'm going to ask everybody as well. We're coming up to the end, but if they are top tips for the teachers listening to bring, equity into the classroom, because it's always good to end any debates about this with something tangible for teachers to take away. But just from a policy level, I think, just my observation, seeing that, I'm doing my doctorate on this at the minute because I'm trying to work out why this equity, what I've worked out, my hypothesis at the minute, just going into schools, is that there's these inequities happening between classrooms, between schools, between in Australia states. So some states are creating their own AI, some are not, some are waiting, some are not. And, there's this stuff happening, and policy doesn't seem to have met anywhere in the middle. The policy took so long to be, well, actually the policy in Australia came out quite quickly, but then got disseminated really, really slowly, in individual state departments and dioceses, and schools are still thinking about now what they're going to do. We haven't done our policy yet. I hear a lot, and we nearly 2 years after the release of kind of ChatGPT onto the world, and people are still thinking, well, what am I going to do? And there's still people adding to the debate and the things we've talked about today about when we should bring the tools and technologies in. And I think, it's important because we're looking at other countries, and I'm going to ask you about New Zealand point of view in a second, Tim and B, but when I'm looking at other countries like the UK and the US, they're actually being a little, and Estonia are doing a lot as well, and they're actually being quite proactive and quite prescriptive to try to use AI as a way to push the economies forward as well. So they're putting policies in which are quite aggressive and quite impactful, whereas it seems a little bit fragmented at the minute in Australia. What's the impression in New Zealand at the minute, Tim, in terms of the implementation of policy, and is the policy landing in the classrooms, or is there still a gap?
Yeah, this is a really hot topic, and it's something we almost talk about every single community of practice session.
Wow.
So,
okay.
You've selected a very complex topic to look into for your doctoral study. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, if I ever finish it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when you finish it, it'll all be different anyway. So
yeah, I know. Yeah. Exactly.
so yeah, just succumb to that thought to begin with. In New Zealand, we've got a self-governing school system, so each school is in charge of their own guidelines and their policies. And one of the things that B and I did when we first started on this journey of understanding whether it was just me and him so excited about generative AI in schools, or where other people were doing it, is we put a survey out to as many educators as we could, and we covered across about 100 schools in the end, over 100 schools. And one of the things that we found was, on top of having absolutely minimal professional learning and development, is that I think only about 8% of those schools had any kind of idea of guidelines or policy with regards to using AI. Now, at the beginning, a lot of schools and educators brought it into what was in existence already around using technology safely and ethics and understanding data and privacy and so on. However, what that prevented was educators to feel like they had the permission or the confidence or the opportunity to use these tools for good. And that's what B was talking about earlier on around everyone's using it in secret. It's like that Spider-Man meme when everyone's pointing to each other going, it's you, it's you, it's you. We're all using it, come on. And the thing I think is that if we were more open about how we've been using these tools and communicated and collaborated and celebrating our successes and our failures and where these tools can work or fall short, then we would have been able to accelerate in a lot more positive way. However, the challenges that we're facing and seeing in New Zealand at the moment is that AI use has been portrayed and painted in a really negative way, and there's constant stories in the press and on the news about, of course, all the real and legitimate threats from AI about using it to bypass the learning, using it in ways which can humiliate and and bully other people and students, but we're not hearing about the opportunities to support inclusive and equitable learning. So yeah, the gap in policy and practice has been huge in New Zealand, and while we've got some really good examples and some wonderful people who are putting some things together, it's not supported educators in a way. I'm not sure, do you think that reflects the conversations that we have on the community, B?
Yeah, definitely. It was 9%. At the end of 2023 said they had a policy, and the NCR research, which just came out this year, it's barely shifted. It's shifted by like 5%. So there's still a massive lack of policy. I gave a talk in a business yesterday about AI, and according to the latest NZAI Forum research, 55% of companies that use AI said they have a clear policy, but only 85% are using. So that's still 40%, that's 65%, 60%-ish don't have one. But even that I would call into place, because I asked them, do you have a clear policy? And they said, yeah. And I said, is the milk in the fridge that is in the staff room, is that for everybody or is that private? And I said, it's for everybody. And I said, does everybody know that? And they're like, yeah. And I said, well, that's a clear policy. Now, if I get asked 20 people in the company, what's the AI policy, will they be able to answer it as quickly and easily as that? And they're like, no, you'd probably get 20 different answers. And I said, then that's not a clear policy. And so that's where the fear and the shame and the secrecy comes about, because like the analogy I gave of Tim, if me and Tim had a company tomorrow, they wouldn't exist, because there's open communication and trust. So it comes down to trust, but we're still waiting. We actually looked to Australia, and we think Australians doing well. They were fast to get their model out, but we've got a national strategy on AI, but we don't have a national strategy on AI in education yet. So still waiting for that. When that comes down, I think there will be some quick movement, because I know principals, and they're just waiting. They're just waiting until they get that email, and then boom, they can disseminate it.
Yeah, and the reason I'm talking about policy, and it sounds kind of boring, but it's the way that if we want to really enable equitable education, we have to put it in writing somewhere and actually call it out. Otherwise, exactly what you're saying happens. Things kind of don't get done. So thank you, gentlemen. And it's not lost on us all. The four of us had a chat before the beginning of this. It's not lost on us all. We're doing a thing about equality and inequity, and we got four guys on this call, right? So thanks, Simone, for bringing us all together. But it isn't lost on us, and we do appreciate everybody that's involved in this debate. And thank you all for the work that you're all doing. It's amazing to hear the passion and the impact and the positive side to all of the AI elements that you're all working on. The New Zealand community sounds like it's really cracking on and doing amazing stuff. So thank you guys for what you're doing in there. But just before we end the recording, what would you one or two tips be for anybody listening who are thinking about trying to implement AI in an equal and kind of fair manner in their schools? So start with you, B.
Just talk to leadership, get something basic in place, and then disseminate it out throughout the school, at the school context. Just talk to leadership, get something basic down so that it's at least agreed upon, and then people can start kind of like at least starting conversations so that we can get rid of that kind of secrecy and shame.
Yeah. Tim?
I see there's several steps on the way to pathways for equity in education with regards to AI. It's acknowledging that there is inequity to begin with, not only with the way the tools are being implemented, the way that the learning behind it's being supported, and the skills that are there, but also the broader issue of inequity in education, acknowledging that every student comes to school with a different set of needs and requirements to succeed. So acknowledge that, and then engage people in the conversation, get people to participate, share it openly, collaborate and talk, and get contribution from broader groups. And then, initiate it with leadership, get some leadership behind it, and get some pragmatic and practical steps to bringing together those voices that you've had as part of that contribution and that engagement, and acknowledging that there's a challenge, but there's also a potential solution, and then moving that forwards. That's how we're going to solve this problem. And it's got such huge potential to enable more equity in education. I just need to hear more people talking about it in positive ways that engages the voices that are already out there and doing things.
Yeah, definitely. And James?
Yeah, no, they're great points. I mean, just to keep your sanity, I think it's good to be cautious but optimistic about AI, and really just be critical but curious. I think are two important ideas to sort of go for. But investing in teacher capacity is huge. So if you invest in teacher capacity, that will have a ripple effect on the student. So start with teachers, and talk to your students. Like hear from them, bring them in on the discussion. They'll probably teach you more than you know already. And like the policy discussion, just have your own policy. Start small. Look at other policies for guidance, but like you're your own context, you're your own school, you're your own institution. Just base it on your own context and do something small first, and then go from there. And I think that would really help.
Yeah, I my little list of things you guys have all just blown it out of the water. The basics. I was my list was start basic, bring the voice of the students along, your own context, do your own policy, be your own in charge of your own thing, do whatever you want. And I think to implement, what Tim and James were saying there earlier on, if you're looking at, a particular tool, or you want to use it with younger kids, or you want to do this, or you want to do that, you want to bring parents along, then you're your own boss. You can do what you want to do, but just make sure you do it in a safe and fair way to bring everybody along, because we do want, I've had such good positive stories and the passion you all bring to this discussion, but we want to raise that tide up and bring all boats with us, I suppose. So thanks again for listening to this today. Hopefully the resources on the Community of Practice and the New Zealand Community of Practice can support you with some more academic research and support. And thanks again, B, Tim and James, and look forward to chatting more about this topic. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.